Today we're going to talk about money. Hi everyone, I am Brittany from Greenbee Floral Co. I am a farmer-florist in Strathroy, Ontario, Canada. Together we are growing and designing in Zone 6A. Today we are going to talk about profitable flower farming. So much of what I post on this channel is the vlogging around picking the pretty flowers and making the pretty arrangements, but we don't talk a lot about the actual cost that goes into the bouquets, your time, your resources, and how to flip a profit on flower farming, even small scale flower farming. And I think this is a really important topic to think about. One, because I feel like there's a lot of gatekeeping around pricing bouquets when it comes to farmers markets, right? Everybody is very like, my pricing is my own, but there are actually industry standards that I think it is important to learn so that you can accurately price the bouquets that you are sending out to market. One thing I see a lot from flower farmers either on YouTube or Instagram is the tendency to underprice your flowers because you are only a farmer's market flower farmer. You're just doing market bouquets, you're doing something that would be like akin to what you would buy in a grocery store. And I'm here to tell you, don't be afraid to charge more. A huge part of flower farming, if you're going to be doing this in a way that is actually a legitimate side hustle, that is not a hobby, right? You need to understand your margins, you need to understand your cost of goods, you need to understand how much everything you have is costing you behind the scenes so that you can actually put forth a margin on your bouquets so that you are making money. Now I am in Canada, so as I talk about some of what I'm going to disclose today, it's important to remember that I am talking from the perspective of somebody who lives in Southwestern Ontario, Canada. So the access to resources, things like wages, are different than what you are going to find in the States. And so some of what I'm talking about, you are going to have to go and do a little bit of research on your own if making a profit on your flowers is something that you want to do long term. The first thing you need to think about when you are pricing your bouquet is the cost of goods in the bouquet itself. And what I mean by that is not just the stem of flowers as what you think it should sell for, but the actual cost of what that flower, the cost that you have incurred as the farmer in order to produce that flower. So the way you're going to do this is you're going to think about all of the infrastructure that you need. So whether it's landscape fabric, if you're paying for city water, if you have sprinkler systems, hoses, snips, things like that, your actual concrete cost on top of the seeds themselves, that you have to think about how much of that you're using in order to produce that one flower. The second thing you need to think about is the actual wholesale value of the stem in which you are growing. As far as I understand, in the US, the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers has an updated wholesale pricing list that if you are a member of the Association of Specialty Cut Flowers, you should be able to have access to that once a season. And often the pricing for wholesale stems on flowers will be dictated by that sheet, right? By that wholesale pricing, at least like what you should be getting per stem for that. In Canada, we don't necessarily have a concrete like pricing list that goes out to every flower farmers. in order to make that pricing. And so for myself personally, one of the things that I did, because we operate as a farm and floral hybrid studio, was I started purchasing flowers wholesale, so from a local distributor who was able to go to the Toronto flower market for me and purchase things like local mums or sunflowers or things like that from other growers, and then get a pricing list for what they are carrying on the trucks. So it's really important to remember as well, right? The distributors themselves are paying for the wholesale cost coming out of, in Ontario, it's the Ontario Flower Growers Association or the import market in Toronto. So that pricing has an additional margin on it so that the wholesaler also has their prices set, right? But that price that you're purchasing as a florist or as a flower farmer from your wholesaler should be the absolute minimum price per stem that you are putting in your bouquet. Because anything less than that, you are selling your flowers for less than what their wholesale value is, as based on what the market dictates. So sunflowers and dahlias are a great example of what I mean when we're talking about pricing per stem. And I'm actually going to use sunflowers as an example because where I am from in Ontario, the average cost of a sunflower off of the flower truck in season is $1.25 a stem. $1.25. That means I am paying $1.25 in order to get one sunflower stem from my wholesale provider. Knowing that means that you, as a farmer florist, should not be selling your sunflowers, especially your pro cuts, for less than $1.25 at market. So selling 5 sunflowers, even for $5, even $10 is less than market value for that stem, at least where I'm from, right? And this is where you're going to have to do a little bit of research to figure out what the market value is on the stems based on where you live. So if you're in Canada, every province has or should have some sort of like list coming out of the main provincial flower market, you know, so for BC or Alberta or Ontario, you know, you have a localized place where your wholesalers are going to get flowers, and that's a really good indication of what your stems could cost. For dahlias, depending on the type of dahlia, they can be anywhere from $1.75 all the way up to $3.50 purchased off the wholesale truck. So if you are bunching 5 cafe au lait dahlias in a bunch for market, and the wholesale cost on those is $3.50 off the truck, you are undervaluing your product and you are probably not making a profit on that product. And I'm going to tell you why. So when I think about pricing my bouquets for farmers markets, right, the minimum markup that I put on those bouquets is 2 times. So I'm going to take the wholesale cost, the cost of goods, so all of the stems and the pricing of those, plus the paper, the business card, the twine, the elastic band, and I'm going to multiply that cost of goods at least by 2. And I'm going to break down why. So let's say that you are doing a farmer's market and you are bringing 20 mixed bouquets to your market and you are bringing 10 mason jar arrangements, okay? So on that, thinking about that, if you are multiplying your cost by 2, if you're doing a $20 retail value bouquet, the cost of goods, maximum cost going into that bouquet is going to be $10. $10 in value at wholesale. Right? And wholesale isn't what you think the stem should cost. Wholesale is what the actual market value of that stem is. And I'm going to tell you why this is important, okay? So pretend that you are doing a week's worth of work on your hobby flower farm or your startup flower farm, and you are spending 10 hours a week weeding, planting, going through and picking Japanese beetles off your zinnias, right? So that's 10 hours of work that you are putting in either on top of your day job in the mornings or whatever you have. And in Canada right now, or at least in Ontario where I am, the minimum wage is somewhere around $16 an hour. So at minimum, you should be opting to make $16 an hour on the work that you are doing, right? And I'm just talking about paying yourself here. What is the point of this if you're not trying to make a little bit of extra money on the side? Now, you've done your 10 hours of work. Now you're going to do probably about 2 hours worth of harvesting alone in order to actually pick the product that you are going to need to make the bouquets that you are bringing from market. So now you are up to 12 hours of work for one farmer's market. On top of that, you're probably going to be spending about 4 hours making bouquets, depending on how fast you do it, right? For me, 4 hours is a little bit on the high end, but for somebody who is just starting out, 4 hours is probably pretty accurate because you're still learning, how to do your hand-tied bouquets and piece everything together. So now you are up to 16 hours of work before the actual market itself. So in Canada, I have to show a wage for the work that I'm doing. So the minimum take-home pay that I should be making, my minimum profit should be $256 based on 16 hours of work multiplied by $16 an hour. Okay. So I'm going to now break down the cost for you. So a bouquet, if you are making a bouquet for the farmer's market and say you have 3 dahlias, you've got 1 gladiolus, we've got 1 sunflower, about 3 cosmos, 3 celosias, 3 zinnias, and like 3 stems of green, right? That's not necessarily a huge bouquet, but when you break down the cost on that, it's already almost $20 in wholesale. So if you have 3 dahlias, and we're talking on the low end, so your Cornell bronzes or your Cornell reds, those fetch about $2 a stem wholesale pricing, which is going to equal $6. Then you have 1 gladiola, which during peak season in Ontario is about 70 to 80 cents a stem. Then you have a sunflower, which we already talked about. We'll say our Pro Cut plums or our Pro Cut golds, those are fetching about $1.25 peak season wholesale. Then you add your 3 cosmos. So for myself, when I am selling cosmos to my wholesaler, we sell them for $7 for a bunch of 10 to 15, depending on how many flowers and stems, which means that is approximately going to come to 50 to 70 cents a stem per cosmo, for a cosmo. Then you're adding your flamingo feather celosia, right? 3 of those, the wholesale cost on those, again, around 70 cents a stem, is going to equal $2. Then we have 3 zinnias, and zinnias is the one that I find really interesting when we're talking about flower farming because it is the most underpriced flower. When I sell my Queen Lime or my Benary Giant zinnias to my wholesaler, my Benary Giants go for $1.25 a stem to my wholesaler, which means his markup is on top of that for the florist. My Queen Lime zinnias I sell for $1, and my Oklahomas I sell for 75 cents. So if you're putting 3 Benary Giant zinnias in your bouquet, you're going to be looking at $1.50 each, which brings that total closer to $5, right? Just in zinnias. And then your 3 greens, say we're talking about basil or bee balm or 9 bark or whatever you have in stock, your greens are going to cost around $1 a stem wholesale, which means you're going to be spending $3. So the math on that, when you add it together, right, this is just in wholesale costs, and that wholesale cost is going to include all of your materials, all of your seed, all of those other miscellaneous costs that your netting that you have around flower farming should be paid in that cost, right? That is your wholesale cost of goods sold. So when we're looking at putting this together at a wholesale cost for the recipe that I just talked about, that bouquet is $19.95 in wholesale cost, which means the minimum it should be fetching at market is $40, minimum. There is a huge tendency in flower farming, especially for new growers, to price what you think the stems should be worth. And I cannot say this enough. When you are in a traditional flower shop, the markup is anywhere from 3 times to 5 times and even higher when you're looking at weddings and funerals. And the reason for that is because on top of the actual price that the florists are paying for flowers, they're also incurring their rents, they are incurring their wages, they are incurring electricity, they are incurring like all of the things that go into having coolers running, right? And that's another cost that you also have as a farmer florist. You have a cooler for your flowers or a cool bot or some sort of walk-in or little fridge. You're paying the electricity on that in order to operate this business that you have going. But then when you think about that wholesale cost, and if you have to pay yourself $256 for the hours that you put, if that's your goal, is to pay yourself a minimum wage for the hours of work that you're putting in, right? And those hours of work are not necessarily included in your cost of goods. The cost of goods is just the seed and the actual physical things that it takes in order to make that seed grow into the flowers that you are harvesting. The hours that you put into that you're wanting to pay yourself for, you're going to have to sell 256, if not more, bouquets at $20 in order to pay, recoup those costs and pay yourself for the amount of work. And this is really important because without having a profit margin on your flowers, you are never going to be able to grow into the next step of your flower farming journey and reinvest into yourself and into your business. There's so many YouTubers that you can follow, and they talk about workshops and all of this education that you can put into your growing. But in order to be able to do that, you also need to be making a profit on your flowers. So what then would we look at for a good recipe at my specific markup for selling a market bouquet, right? So we're gonna talk about that too. So now we have a sunflower for $1.25. We can still have our 3 dahlias for $6, but we're probably going to focus on having the 3 celosias instead of putting in 3 Benary giant zinnias. It's a considerably smaller bouquet, but now my cost of goods into that bouquet is $10, and I will sell the bouquet at market for $20. Plus tax. Then the money that I am making will pay my wages, and the cost of goods gets reinvested back into the business. There are so many YouTubers, and if you want a really, really good breakdown of pricing, Allison Ellis's Flower Math was one of the best YouTube videos that I've ever come across, where she breaks down, how to price your bouquets, your flowers appropriately so that you can actually make a profit. And so much of how I've structured my business has actually been based off of what she said. Now, when you do think about it, the reason for a 3-time markup over a 2-time markup is that 3-point markup allows you to cover your cost of goods sold, right? Your wholesale cost into the flowers, so all of those little bits of landscape fabrics and hoses and things that you need in order to run your farm. Deer fence, it's a great one. But then that additional markup allows you to put money back into the business so that you can do things like order peony roots the following year, or more ranunculus corms, or whatever it is you decide that is going to allow you to reinvest. If you're saving for a cooler, that 3 times mark is going to be where you're not going to sacrifice paying yourself as well as reinvesting. And I think as farmer florists who are focusing on a farmer's market business plan, right, a business experience, we are very, very quick to undervalue what we are doing because we are not florists. But the reality is that you are still adding value to that flower by putting it in a hand-tied bouquet and taking the time to make it something that is going to draw people into your stand, right? And without taking into account the value that you are adding, you are going to be stuck undervaluing what you are putting into that bouquet, and you are not going to be garnishing a wage or even making profit on the flowers to begin with. It's not enough, right? When you sit there and think, well, a zinnia shouldn't cost more than 50 cents because I know how many of them there are on a plant and I wouldn't pay more than 50 cents for that zinnia. It's not about you. It's not about you. You are presenting a product and deciding that its value is less than what it actually is. We need to stop doing that in the farmer-florist industry, right? I cannot stress enough how important it is for brand new flower farmers to get hooked into the Association of Specialty Cut Flower Growers, whether you're in the US or whether you are in Canada, to join Facebook groups with other flower farmers, to perhaps have a contract with a local wholesaler. Regardless of whether or not you plan to purchase roses from them, they have access to so many other local blooms, and that could present to be a really good opportunity for you to, one, see what the types of flowers, what they look like. So snapdragons was one I talked about in my last video, and I got so much feedback from that one, right? Everybody was so surprised that we weren't planting snapdragons. But if I want my flowers to look like they belong in the OGFA, the Ontario Flower Growers Association, I need to be able to produce a stem on my farm that is comparable to what my wholesaler can get from other Ontario growers. And so even if you are not going to be purchasing import flowers from them, it's so important to see what professional growers in your area are accomplishing on larger scales, because that quality, that type of stem, whether it's a dahlia or a sunflower or a snapdragon or a larkspur, that is what the florist is expecting, at least in quality, when you are selling to them. Ranunculus is a great example of this. There is a huge push for ranunculus in the floral industry right now because it's becoming increasingly popular. But I think what we forget, and this is one that boggles my mind, I cannot believe when I see farmer florists that are selling bunches of 10 ranunculus for $20. Because purchasing that off of a wholesale truck, Ontario grown ranunculus off of a wholesale truck, is $3.75 at peak for cloney ranunculus. Don't undervalue the cost, the pricing of your blooms. What you are growing is important, it matters, and you are adding value to that stem by arranging it in a mason jar, by putting it in a bouquet, by presenting it in whatever type of paper you have decided or packaging you have decided to do when you go to market. You are spending the time sitting at that market, right? Again, that is $16 an hour for an additional 4 to 5 hours that you are sitting at the market trying to sell your product. So now you are even higher than that $256 that you should be making off that market. If you are not making a profit on your cut flower farm, it's not a business, it's a hobby. Let that sink in. If you are not making money on your cut flower farming, it is not a business, it's a hobby. So why is this important? Why is all this information around what you should be charging for your flowers so important? For starters, respecting the industry standard for pricing is going to give you more clout, more respect from the other farmer florists and other florists in your area. If you are selling a bunch of Lysianthus for $20 off your farm stand and turning around and selling it for $22 to your florists, you are not creating a relationship that is going to be productive with your florists. So it's really important to decide what it is that you would like to focus on when it comes to flower farming. If you are looking to get into wholesale, that means that your retail costs are going to need to be adjusted. It means that you are going to need to be pricing your stems at a 2 to 3 times markup for the farmer's market. Because otherwise that relationship that you are going to start to make with your florists, with your other farmer florists, and with your wholesalers it's gonna break down very quickly, because why would a florist pay $22 from you for the same stems that you are putting out on your flower cart or your flower stand or your market for less than what you're selling them? Something to think about. There's no wrong direction in which to take your flower farming journey. You know, when we first started incorporating more than just what I grow into our floristry, I had some pushback on that from followers, but the reality is that that was always the plan for the business. I always, from the very beginning, wanted to take a collaborative approach to this, because I was able to acknowledge that in the climate I am in, solely flower farming in the way that I wanted to design and farm and do weddings and do funerals and all of this full service flowering that I wanted to do wasn't going to be possible without having wholesale floral as well. So my goal has always been to supplement, to focus on bringing in sustainable alternatives from my farm while not sacrificing some of the good things that are a part of the global flower community, right? But the biggest setback in that is that you really have to spend the time looking at the pricing models by which you are pricing your bouquets. And once I started to figure out what the wholesale cost was on the flowers based on what they were going for market, I could get that stem price minimum for my own flowers and then the markup. Now, the last thing when you're pricing bouquets, a general rule by which I was told this, and I still think it is one of the absolute most brilliant ways in which to price: never make the number easily divisible. And by that I mean, if you have a bunch of sunflowers and your sunflowers are $4 a stem, don't put 5 sunflowers in a bouquet for $20, because that is a number that is incredibly easily divisible by itself, right? Or 20 divided by 5 is 4. So instantly the customer knows they're paying $4 a stem. And you don't want them to be able to do that math, at least not easily, because as soon as you start getting into those decimals, they think they're getting a deal. So what I will typically do is, if I have cuts of sunflowers that I know need to be sold, ones that have blown a little bit further open than necessarily I want, I'll take 3 of those and pair them with 3 sunflowers that, you know, are gonna last a little longer, and mark that bouquet for $20. Because 20 is not easily divisible by 6. So then they think, oh my goodness, I'm getting a deal because I'm not paying $4 a sunflower. But in reality, what I'm actually doing is using that as a way to get rid of stems which might not be sellable at the florist level. They're not going to, you know, last a full week in a vase. But I'm using that in order to cut down on my waste costs while also giving the customer a bouquet that is going to continue blooming for 10 days. So these are things to think about when you are pricing your bouquet. But if we've taken anything away from today's video, it is that you need to mark up your flowers as a farmer florist. You need to find the resources in order to determine what the wholesale cost for your stem of flowers is, so that you are not underpricing yourself in the broader market. That's going to get you respect from other florists. It's going to enable you to reinvest into your business, and it is going to allow you to pay yourself. Because what is the point of doing flowers, of running a business, besides the fact that we all love flowers and they bring us joy? But what is the point of starting any type of business like this if it is not to make money? So think about that. Think about that. Do that research. Now, as I said, I'm from Canada, so your numbers might look very different depending on what country you are watching this from. I'd love to see some of that conversation happening down in the comments below. But here in Ontario, right, I made a point to access my local wholesalers' pricing list, developed an account with them, eventually grew into the point where I'm purchasing and also selling flowers to them. And because of that, I know what my stem costs should be. So figure those things out. And if you don't have access to stem costs, sit down and figure out how much money you are putting into everything. How much landscape fabric? What was the cost of the landscape fabric for the bed that you are growing your zinnias in? What is the cost of the water? sit down and figure that out. It's a lot of math, right? Nobody gets into flowers because they love math. I definitely didn't. My degree is in English and history, so having to spend the last 3 years learning how to do math was very difficult for me. But you do need to understand all of these things in order to make a profit. And if for no other reason, if you are doing well enough in your business, if you are hitting, your sales goals for your markets, you're gonna have to pay taxes. And depending on what state or province you're in, you might have to pay some sort of licensing fees in order to be able to do what you're doing, which means you're gonna have the government wanting to make sure that they're paid either income tax or sales tax on the items that you're selling, right? Flowers, especially in Ontario, don't fall under specifically farm gate. They're not exempt from sales tax. So you need to figure that out as well. And the best way to do that is from the very beginning, is to know your costs, to have a markup, and to not undervalue the price of the beautiful, beautiful flowers that you are growing. And at the end of the day, remember, it's not about your personal preference. It's about the math. And math doesn't care about how you feel. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, you can post those below. I would love to talk more about the business side of flowers. It's so hard when everybody watching is from such different places, right? So it's not just about growing pretty things. We want to make sure that our businesses at the end of the day are profitable. So hope you guys have a great day. Thank you so much for watching. Bye.